In this video, I am going to rank all 16 finals opponents of LeBron James and Michael Jordan from worst to best. When looking at criteria, I essentially looked all across the board. Regular season performance, postseason performance, the level of competition in the postseason, and most importantly, how these teams performed in the finals, were there any injuries, other contexts like that. I'm taking all of that into account, as well as the eye test. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this video, which will begin right after this. Before we deep dive into today's video, I just want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's video, DraftKings. Basketball fans, it's crunch time. The NBA playoffs are heating up and every game is do or die. With the finals on the horizon, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. Right now, you can play along with DraftKings Pick 6, a fresh and exciting way to experience daily fantasy sports. All new customers who play just $5 will score $50 in bonus picks to keep you locked in all postseason long. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and sign up with code BARRY. Getting started is simple. Just download the DraftKings Pick 6 app and sign up with code BARRY. Pick at least 2 players and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat. Like, will they score 20 or more points or have 3 or more assists? Lock them in and compete against others for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and sign up with code BARRY only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. Number 16, the 1991 Lakers. A lot of people pretend that the 91 Lakers were the Showtime Lakers and that Magic Johnson, quote unquote, passed the torch to Michael Jordan after the Bulls defeated the Lakers in 5 games in the finals, but that's not really the case. This Lakers team, despite still having Magic and James Worthy, was a far cry from the dominant juggernauts of the 80s. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was long retired, Pat Riley was gone, and James Worthy himself missed a game in the finals with injury, as well as Byron Scott. They were a good regular season team, and they upset the Blazers in the conference finals, which was impressive, but really outside of games 1 and 3 in the finals, the games weren't very competitive, and the Bulls were quite easily better than a team that was really being backpacked by Magic Johnson, and there is a non-0% chance that Magic Johnson in this series was already infected with HIV and didn't know it. So that's just something to consider, because he retired 5 months later. Number 15, the 1996 Seattle SuperSonics. The 90s SuperSonics, going into 1996, were known as a team that was amazing in the regular season, but would choke come playoff time. But they did seem to get their heads on straight in the playoffs in 96, winning the Western Conference, barely over the Utah Jazz. Their most impressive playoff series win might have come in the second round when they swept the 2-time defending champion Houston Rockets. But by the time they got to the finals with an inflated 64-18 record because of expansion and all that other shit, Gary Payton was hurt, and although Shawn Kemp actually performed pretty well, this just wasn't a very good team, at least by comparison to the other teams on this list. A lot of solid players, but nobody really dominant, and that's how the finals went. The Bulls basically won all of their games comfortably outside of Game 2, and although the Sonics did give their fans some false hope by winning Games 4 and 5 to extend the series to 6 games, that's all it was, false hope. Personally, I'm not very impressed. Number 14, the 2020 Miami Heat. By far the worst opponent that LeBron ever faced in the finals by essentially every metric. They were 7th in net rating in the regular season, and they got lucky in the postseason when, in the second round, they got to face a pretty beat-up Milwaukee Bucks team before surviving to defeat the Celtics, which really, at this point, who hasn't beaten the Celtics in the playoffs? Which set up the Jimmy Butler-led team with former Miami Heat superstar LeBron James and Anthony Davis and the defensive-minded Los Angeles Lakers. Butler, for his credit, would put up one of the greatest performances in finals history, but the rest of the team was uneven. Bam Adebayo missed a couple games, Goran Dragic missed most of the series, and it still went 6 games, but at the end of the day, LeBron and Anthony Davis were just too much for the Heat, and it was a decisive 6-game victory for LeBron to give him his most recent and probably last championship. Number 13, the 1992 Portland Trailblazers. 1992, and the number 2 is quite a fitting number for the Trailblazers of this season because they were second in net rating behind the Chicago Bulls. They had the second place finisher in MVP voting in Clyde Drexler behind Michael Jordan of, you guessed it, the Chicago Bulls, and the team that they would face in the finals that they lost to was, you guessed it, the Chicago Bulls. So essentially, they got cucked by the Bulls in many ways. This Blazers team had one surefire MVP candidate superstar in Clyde Drexler, who went on to be a Hall of Famer, but a guy who never won a championship as the first option. And his performance in the finals was pretty underwhelming, as was the entire Blazers team's performance. They were just not known as a very smart team. They got blown out in multiple games in this series, and probably the most unforgivable sin was in Game 6, with Michael Jordan on the bench with a double-digit lead to begin the fourth quarter. The Blazers let the Bulls back into the game, where they eventually lost. This team, a very good team, but just not a great team. The Blazers' title window in the early 90s was 3 years, and this was the end of it, before they went back into the depths of mediocrity. Number 12, the 1998 Utah Jazz. The 98 Jazz, and really the Malone-Stockton Jazz in general, were a bunch of chokes, but they did manage in the late 90s, after nearly a decade and a half together, to finally break through to the final, where unfortunately for them, I guess they had to run into Michael Jordan's Bulls. But this was still a team that had multiple opportunities to win the championship over the Bulls, and they choked, because that's what they did. All they do is fucking choke. Karl Malone was known as a playoff dropper. Everybody, like, it's disgusting. This team is most famous for scoring 54 points in Game 3 of the NBA Finals that year, which is, I can't even fathom that. To be fair, that was pretty much an outlier performance, but still, it's embarrassing. John Stockton, in the last 5 games of the 98 Finals versus the Bulls, averaged 6.8 points per game, and this is supposed to be MJ's best competition. Malone, for his part, actually had a decent series, but it still wasn't anything special. Basically, at the end of the day, this version of the Jazz team was just a slightly inferior version of number 11, which is the 1997 Utah Jazz. If there was ever a team, or if you want to talk about a team that was ever closer to defeating the Bulls in the finals, you would probably say the 97 Jazz are number 1. In terms of the regular season net ratings and the team records and all that shit, they had all of it. It was elite. Again, like most teams in the mid to late 90s, they were a good team whose record was inflated by expansion and watered down talents. This was also the first time in the Stockton and Malone era that they broke through to get to the finals, finally possibly shaking off that choker label, but then they got it right back in Game 1 when Malone bricked 2 free throws at the line with the game tied in the final 30 seconds, and then Jordan went down and hit a game winner. Or you could look at the flu game, MJ's infamous flu game in 97. In Game 5, with the series tied 2-2, the Utah Jazz proceeded at home to shoot 10 for 36 from the field for 35 points, including 4 of 17 in the fourth quarter to lose. And then that's not all. In Game 6, with the game tied at 86 in the final couple minutes, the Jazz had multiple chances to take the lead, and they blew multiple point-blank layups, and the game ended with Steve Kerr making the title-winning shot for the Bulls. Simply put, this was a good team, the Jazz, but again, they were chokers. They just were not able to close games, and Karl Malone in particular was horrific in the clutch in this series, much like he was for most of his career. And that's really the difference between these Jazz teams winning a couple championships and not having any championships. And at number 10, we have the 1993 Phoenix Suns. To me, the 93 Suns, statistically, they went 62-20, and they had a better record than the Bulls that year. Their net rating was 4th. They had the best offense in the league, but their path to the finals was a little bit bumpy. They got pushed to the limit twice by the Lakers and the Sonics, but they did prevail, and they got through to face the Bulls. Now, you have to remember, in 93, the Phoenix Suns, led by the newly acquired Charles Barkley, had the best home record in the league. Now, guess what their fucking home record in the 93 finals was? That's right. They went 0-3 in the finals at home. They actually won 2 of the 3 games on the road in Chicago Stadium. Stadium, which was considered one of the most difficult places to play. So they did the hard part, but they crapped their pants at the easy part. And the easy part was winning at home, in case you did not get it. But despite this, they were still one shot away from forcing a Game 7 at home, but that gosh darn John Paxton just had to make that game winner at the end of Game 6, while Phoenix shot 5 for 22 in the fourth quarter. The reason I think that Phoenix is the best team that the Bulls ever faced, despite the metrics not saying so, is to me, they pushed Michael Jordan to play at a higher level in order to achieve victory than any other of his finals opponents did. Michael Jordan averaged 41 points, and of course the Suns, not being a great defensive team, played a role in this, but Jordan had to be excellent and really had a little less margin for error against the Suns, in my opinion, than he did against any other team. And because Michael Jordan is one of the top 2 players ever, he did it, and to me, it's his most impressive finals performance. Of course, this Suns team still was limited, and Kevin Johnson had a terrible series. Charles Barkley had a couple monster performances and then a couple mediocre performances. The reason I give the Suns the nudge over the Jazz teams is that if Michael Jordan played against the Suns the way he did against those 2 Jazz teams, the Suns would have won. Number 9, the 2012 Oklahoma City Thunder. The 2012 Thunder had the three-headed monster of Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden. And yes, Russell Westbrook was a good player at one point. They were young, and they were considered by many people to be the next dynasty in the NBA, especially as the Lakers got older. Speaking of the Lakers, the Thunder dispatched the defending champion Mavericks in the first round, then defeated Kobe Bryant's Lakers, the last playoff series Kobe Bryant would ever play, and in their most impressive series, they destroyed the San Antonio Spurs, and Kevin Durant was putting up insane numbers, setting up a interesting matchup with the Miami Heat and LeBron James in the finals, where they ended up losing in 5 games. And this is why they're ranked that low, is the fact that even when he was still good, Russell Westbrook was just prone to ridiculously dumb decisions, and James Harden also underperformed in the finals. But this was before anybody knew that James Harden would go on to be one of the greatest chokers in the history of the league. In fact, this was before anybody knew James Harden would even leave OKC, which he did in the ensuing months, being traded to the Houston Rockets, where his career took off. But overall, this Thunder team had some huge star power in names, but when it came down to the clutch and execution, they are probably one of the worst teams that LeBron played in the finals, which is why he was able to beat them to capture his first championship. Number 8, the 2007 San Antonio Spurs. This team, honestly, is the toughest team for me to rank, because if you look at their regular season, they, in terms of the metrics, had the best net rating in the league, but they somewhat underachieved in terms of expected win-loss numbers. They benefited from the Dallas Mavericks choking in the first round versus Golden State, and they also benefited in the second round versus Phoenix by the league stepping in and suspending Amari Stoudemire and Boris Diaw for a crucial Game 5 with the series tied at 2. They easily dispatched the Utah Jazz, and then, as we all know, they faced the one-man show, the Cleveland Cavaliers, in the NBA Finals, where they swept the Cavaliers 4-0. The other thing that's interesting about the 07 Spurs is that their margin of victory was not that impressive. In fact, it's one of the lower margin of victories of all the teams on this list, but they went 16-4 in the playoffs. They won a lot of close games, winning being the key term there, and they also featured Duncan, Parker, Ginobili, and Pop all in their primes. So I think they were even better probably than what the metrics say they were. Do I think that if they had played LeBron in his prime that they would have been able to beat him? I don't know. Do I think that they would have been able to beat the Michael Jordan Bulls? Probably, but I can't say for certain that they would. But I like their chances over any team that Jordan played, because this was a group of players that had actually won multiple championships. The only finals opponent that Michael Jordan played against with a guy that had multiple championship experiences was Magic Johnson, and you already know the backstory there. At number 7, the 2011 Dallas Mavericks. Yes, as a disclaimer, I'll just get it right out of the way. The Dallas Mavericks, they won the championship. They swept the 2-time defending champion Lakers. They destroyed the young OKC Thunder, and they defeated the Big Three Miami Heat in the finals. A legendary championship run. They were a very good team, even a great team. Dirk Nowitzki had arguably the most clutch playoff run of any superstar in recent memory in 2011. And yes, despite all of that, they should have lost in the finals, and they would have lost if not for LeBron James' choke. So yes, LeBron James should have been able to defeat the Dallas Mavericks in 2011. 2011. I've never really argued otherwise, but that doesn't mean that the Mavericks were some terrible team or some scrub team. In fact, they were very, very good, and they got better, it seemed, as the postseason went along. But again, it always comes back to LeBron. So despite the fact that they might have had the most impressive title run individually from a narrative standpoint, maybe ever, I can't really rank them higher than this because deep down I know they still should have lost. But hey, LeBron choked and they took advantage of it, so good for them. Just for the record, this is the last of the teams that LeBron faced that I could potentially see Michael Jordan beating in a series. Number 6, the 2013 San Antonio Spurs. This team really gets lost in the shuffle historically for a couple reasons. One is because of what happened the next year when they did win the championship in dominating fashion, and also because anytime you mention the 2013 Spurs, people automatically think of Ray Allen and the fact that they blew a 3-2 lead in the finals. But this team was a monster. In fact, going into the finals, they had an average margin of victory of over 10 points a game, and they had a 12-2 record, so they dominated the Western Conference on their way to the finals, and they were literally one possession away from winning the championship. This team was no joke. And this was also the team where we saw Kawhi Leonard emerge as a legitimate player and somebody who gave them hope for the future. But also, Tim Duncan, despite being old, was still first team All-NBA this year. Tony Parker was All-NBA. Danny Green, in the first 5 games of the series, was literally shooting something like 70% from 3. I'm not joking. So this Spurs team was unbelievably loaded. Even though they did not win the championship, I think they are decisively better than any team Michael Jordan ever played in the finals. It's just that they had to run into the GOAT, which is unfortunate. At number 5, the 2015 Golden State Warriors. Now, this is an interesting team to rank because I'm old enough to remember in the moment when this team was dominating out of nowhere, nobody knew how to handle it because at that point in time, they had always been the cute little Splash Brothers, and they're going to be a first or second round exit, but they're going to shoot a lot of threes, and it's really fun. And then they fired Mark Jackson. Steve Kerr comes in, and they put up dominating numbers. They were second in offensive rating, first in defensive rating, first in net rating, historically great, but they also benefited from a lot of injuries. They didn't have to face the Oklahoma City Thunder and Kevin Durant because OKC missed the playoffs that year because of Durant's injuries. They didn't have to face the defending champions San Antonio Spurs, who had defeated them 2 years earlier in the playoffs. They didn't have to play the Los Angeles Clippers, the team that had defeated them the previous year in the playoffs, so they had a relatively easy march to the finals, where things then got even easier for them when Kyrie Irving got hurt at the end of Game 1, but they eventually sealed the deal, winning the series in 6. However, I am of the belief that had Kyrie Irving not gotten hurt, LeBron James and the Cavaliers would have won this series. Still, this Golden State team was no joke, and there's a reason why they won 67 games and made the finals, even if I also think they were incredibly lucky. Steph Curry was the MVP. Draymond Green was already asserting himself as one of the elite defensive players. Klay Thompson was an All-NBA player. Andre Iguodala was still in his prime, and even though he might not have deserved Finals MVP, he still had a great Finals performance. So this team was still a hell of a team, even though they were lucky. Number 4, the 2014 San Antonio Spurs. After losing the 2013 Finals in tragic fashion, the Spurs seemed to be determined to rip the league a new asshole the following season, leading the league in wins and leading the league in net rating and all of that shit. In terms of how good they were in the postseason, it's a mixed bag. They lost a decent amount of games. They got taken to 7 games in the first round. They defeated the Trailblazers really easily in 5 in the second round, and they got pushed to 6 games in the conference finals by OKC. So they weren't necessarily a dominant all-time team in terms of win-loss record, but their margin of victory was ridiculous. And then in terms of strictly how they performed in the finals, just in the finals, nothing else, the 2014 Spurs might be the greatest finals team ever. They still lost the game, but in their 4 wins, they just completely annihilated Miami. It just systematically annihilated Miami and ended the Big Three Heatles era. As a LeBron fan, I don't really have anything to say all these years later about what happened, because the Spurs, literally after the series was tied at 1-1, the Spurs just decided not to miss any shots the last 3 games of the series, and it was at one point breathtaking and spectacular. On the other hand, it was unbelievably infuriating because there was really no counterpunch. But that's the reason why this Spurs team ranks as high as they do, is because they shot an ungodly percentage in the finals. They shot 47% from 3, and as a team they had the same level of efficiency consistency as unanimous MVP Steph Curry, okay? Nobody is ever beating that, except maybe some of the teams that are still on this list. At number 3, the 2016 Golden State Warriors. This team, as you all know, finished 73-9 and was historically great. They were able to survive a Steph Curry injury in the first couple rounds of the playoffs before running into a very, very good Oklahoma City team, falling behind 3-1, and then coming back from being down 3-1 to make the NBA Finals for a rematch from the year before. There's 2 reasons why this team will always be remembered. The first is because of Steph Curry's unanimous MVP season, one of the greatest seasons any player has ever had in NBA history, and maybe one of the most influential seasons also in NBA history. Klay Thompson was an All-NBA player. Draymond Green was an All-NBA player. They also had a Finals MVP coming off the bench just for shits and giggles. Sean Livingston never missed a mid-range shot. They just were an unbelievable team. And after they had come back from being down 3-1 in the conference finals and then went up 3-1 themselves in the NBA Finals, with all 3 wins coming in pretty decisive fashion, it appeared that it was guaranteed they were going to win their second straight championship and cement themselves as the greatest team of all time. But we know what happened. LeBron James happened. Kyrie Irving happened. LeBron haters and Steph fans will say, well, Draymond got suspended and Steph had a boo-boo and Andrew Bogut got hurt and all these other crappy excuses. But even with all of that, it took LeBron and Kyrie performing at GOAT levels to barely squeak by the Warriors. So even though they did not win a championship, they still won 88 games on the season, which is still the most wins any team has ever had in a season, regular season and playoffs combined, although it did not end in a championship. But make no mistake, this team was all-time great, and if not for the GOAT, LeBron James, they would have won. Number 2, the 2018 Golden State Warriors. Again, this is another situation where you just had to be there. The 2018 Golden State Warriors were essentially just coasting all throughout the regular season, which is to be expected, considering they had the most talented team in the history of the league. They had 4 All-Stars. Kevin Durant was first-team All-NBA. Stephen Curry was third-team All-NBA. Klay Thompson and Draymond Green both got Defensive Player of the Year votes. But again, they basically coasted, and they had the 3rd highest net rating, which was just them being lazy. Once the playoffs started, even without Steph, they were able to defeat the Spurs in 5 games. Then they destroyed New Orleans in 5 games. And then they got to what was by far the toughest series they had in the KD era, which was the Houston Rockets series in the conference finals. They went down 3-2, and then we know what happened. Chris Paul hurt his hamstring, and then the Warriors ended up winning games 6 and 7. Some people will say that this is evidence that these Warriors teams were beatable, and I say that it might not be entirely wrong, but this Warriors team really did not play seriously a lot of the time because they were good enough to defeat basically anybody, even with half effort. So I think once they realized, hey, we have to actually play as hard as we can in order to beat this team in Houston that was an all-time great team in their own right, they blew Houston out in the second halves of both games 6 and 7. Out of the 8 series they played in 2017 and 2018, this was the only series that went past 5 games. So if you want to say that they weren't great because of it, I disagree. Then were the 96 Bulls not a great team because they got taken to 6 games by an injured Gary Payton and the Sonics? Or the 98 Bulls weren't great because they got taken to 7 games by Rick Smits and Reggie Miller? Or that the 92 Bulls weren't a great team because they got taken to 7 games by Patrick Ewing and John Starks and Xavier McDaniel? I mean, you can do this all you want. Either way, once they got to the finals versus LeBron, it was more of the same story. Kevin Durant just completely shifted the balance of everything. It's complete bullshit, and they swept the Cavaliers. There's no doubt in my mind that they would destroy MJ's Bulls through sheer talent and shooting, and they just had too much offense to keep up with. But this wasn't them in their final form. Their final form, and really the final form of all NBA teams ever, is the number 1 team on my list, 2017 Golden State Warriors. Simply put, the 2017 Golden State Warriors are the greatest basketball team in NBA history. Really, any way you look at it. They were first in offense, second-rated defense. They had a historically great net rating. They started the postseason 15-0. They swept the entire Western Conference. They did get lucky when Zaza Pachulia put a hit out on Kawhi Leonard in the conference finals, but this team was just insane. A 73-win team with the 2-time reigning MVP and 2 other All-NBA players and a Finals MVP, added a top 3 player in the world at his peak, and the results were what you would imagine. As somebody who was rooting against this team, it was basically like trying to hold water in your palms. It was impossible, and and it was just a losing battle. I saw LeBron and Kyrie put up some insane numbers, particularly LeBron, in the first half of these games, and it was just to keep pace, and they would still be losing. I've never seen any team as good as this. KD and Steph were both unbelievably efficient. It was just, they're the best team of all time, and they will beat the crap out of anybody. I wish they never existed. I think that the history of the league and discourse right now would be way better if they had never existed, but the fact is that they do exist, and even though their rings don't count because it's unfair, the fact that those rings are ineligible because the Warriors were unfair says it all. They're the best team of all time, and they would beat up on anybody. Yes, even Michael Jordan. Here's just some graphs. Here's the first graph that I made. This is the margin of victory for all the teams that Jordan and LeBron played in the finals before they played the finals. So if people will say, oh, well, you know, of course Jordan's opponents are going to have lower ratings because they lost. Well, here you go. Before both of them even got into the picture, how their opponents performed in the playoffs, pretty much the same story. LeBron's opponents were a lot better. And then when you include the playoffs, it's again not even close. The top 9 teams in terms of average margin of victory were all LeBron opponents, including 3 teams that LeBron defeated, had better margin of victory postseasons than any team Jordan defeated. I've been saying it for years that LeBron's competition in the finals was way better and is really the biggest reason why LeBron has fewer rings than Jordan, not because Jordan is better than LeBron. And people have gotten mad at me and called me a lot of names, and they've been really, really mean cyber bullies, but yet I persevere, and I'm still persevering right now with this video, and I want to thank all of you for watching. And I want to say to all of you, stay out of trouble, and if you get into trouble, I will find you, and I will give you a nice little spank on the butt. Enjoy the rest of the NBA playoffs. I know I will.